there. Thank you for joining me today. Got a big agenda going on today. I'm going to get to the bottom of why Satan hates women. Yeah, it all starts to make sense when you take a look at that Bible. So, before we get started, we're going to talk a little bit about these butterflies. Do you realize the monarch butterfly, it lays its egg on a leaf and then it flies away. So the newly laid egg has no mother. Nobody to protect it, nobody to teach it, nobody to guide it. And then the caterpillar hatches alone, eats alone, survives alone. By the time it becomes a butterfly, the parent has been long gone, dead, replaced, or irrelevant. There is no relationship. The mother does not pass any memories down. So, and no mother was raised the next generation. So it's interesting about this stuff about women, right? So, generation after generation, this system seems to survive. A system that, like the monarch butterfly, ensures survival. And they have a big thing about this monarch butterfly. And let me tell you a little bit about it. The butterfly never meets its mother. It must survive independently and remains a stranger to affection. An animal nurtured by mother's milk, however, is dependent on it for its basic survival. But in this case, a child who grows up this way without a mother grows up in a cold and detached home environment, similar to the butterfly, in that kindness is sparing. Once an adult, it will be very difficult for that person to show compassion. Human affection is a very, very important element. At a young age, compassion is very crucial, not only for survival, but to establish these very important human values. And this butterfly thing takes a bunch of wild turns. We're going to take a look at Genesis. When I first started all this, I wasn't raised with the Bible to begin with. And, I thought if you said, well, here's the Bible and this is a Genesis quote, I would have thought that the Genesis quote would be within this Bible, right? Because I just kind of figured that, well, there's one Bible, right? I never assumed that there were a bunch of them. So Genesis actually is interesting because it's the first book of the Bible, and it appears in both the Hebrew Bible, which is called the Tanakh, or the Christian Old Testament. And Genesis is a Greek word meaning origin, beginning, or creation, kind of like that butterfly, right? New beginnings come out of that little shell. In Hebrew, the book is called Bereshit, and it's Bereshit, which means in the beginning. So Genesis is where they get all this stuff from. And the book of Genesis is what it's called. And Genesis lays out the foundational narratives. It talks about the creation of the world, Adam and Eve, early humanity, Cain and Abel and Noah, and the patriarchs, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and Joseph. And so what it is the first one was the Genesis, right? So then this book from the Genesis gets shared by these other religions, and then it gets interpreted. So interpretations of Genesis vary widely across Jewish, Christian, and later theological traditions. So that's where they get these ideas about women, sin, or blame, like Eve's role in Genesis, are often shaped more by later interpretation rather than by the raw text alone. So, because we're going to take a look at the root of all this stuff, we first start off with Genesis, right? So, what religions use this Genesis book? Well, the religions are called the Abrahamic, Abrahamic religions, and that includes Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. So Judaism uses the book of Genesis, and it's called the Bereshit in Hebrew. It is part of the Torah, the core sacred text. Christianity also uses the book of Genesis. It has the same foundational stories, but interpreted through Christian theology. And Islam does not have Genesis as a book, but the Quran contains many of the same figures and stories, like Adam and Eve, Noah, or Abraham. These stories are similar but not identical, but they are retold with different emphasis in theology. So there's some religions that do not use Genesis, and that would be the obvious ones like Hinduism, Buddhism, and those indigenous religions. So Genesis is specific to the Abrahamic tradition. So first we have to get that straight, okay? And Abrahamic refers to a group of religions that trace their spiritual lineage back to Abraham. These religions share a common origin story centered on Abraham as a founding figure chosen by God. So, then we have the Abrahamic religions. The three main ones are Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. All three of them believe in one God. They all recognize Abram as a key figure, and they share the overlapping early narratives like the creation, the flood, and the early patriarchs. So, how do they connect to Abraham? Well, in Judaism, Abraham is the founding father of the Jewish people. In Christianity, Abraham is a model of faith and part of Jesus' lineage. In Islam, in Islam, Abraham or Ibrahim is a prophet and foundational figure tied to the origins of Mecca. So they all connect together very conveniently, right? So when people say Abrahamic religions, they're grouping these traditions because they come from the same historical root. They share related texts and stories like those in the book of Genesis, but they developed different beliefs, laws, and interpretations over time. But the root of all of this stuff comes from Genesis, right? All this stuff about the sin and the eating of the apple and Adam and Eve and all that. So this is an interesting quote that I found. It says, God starts by addressing Satan, telling him he is going to eat dirt for the rest of his days. Then he reveals something that makes Satan cringe in horror. His ultimate defeat will come at the hands of a woman. Why women? Why have women always been second class citizens? Well, I got the answers for you today. But before I get started, let's talk a little bit about what's going on around us. We had an unfortunate death. The CEO and owner of OnlyFans, Radvinsky is his name. He died at the age of 43. The UK-based Ukrainian American billionaire businessman and computer programmer was the founder of the cam site My Free Cams and the majority owner of OnlyFans. You know that thing that kind of doubles as prostitution? And they said, "We are deeply saddened to announce the death of Leo Ravinsky. Leo passed away peacefully after a long battle with cancer," stated the London based company in a statement reported by Bloomberg. His family has requested privacy at this difficult time. I gotta tell you, now I'm not laughing because the guy is dead. Well, did I have a laugh earlier? Maybe you'll have to decide that for yourself. But what I what I couldn't stop laughing about, just the nerve of these people. They come up with something called OnlyFans, where they want women to go and undress in front of cameras and stuff, right? But they want privacy. They want privacy. Just like those royals, they're falling apart because Princess Anne was heckled this week. I say heckle them more. So, anyway, let me get back to this Ravinsky guy. The parent company is called Phoenix International Limited, was owned by Ravinsky, who reportedly earned more in 100 seconds than what the average OnlyFans creator grossed in a year. Born in Odessa, Ukraine. Yeah, right over there, right over there. Radvinsky moved to Chicago, well, another top location. He later graduated with a degree in economics from Northwest University. Well, who taught him about the porn? Northwest? So, anyway, so yeah, quite a guy, quite a guy. And I couldn't help but notice also there's been a big burglary going on in Los Angeles. A viral OnlyFans model burglary case is turning heads as prosecutors lay out a pattern of alleged deception and theft across Los Angeles. Authorities say 28-year-old Ada Lavi, known online as Mia Ventura, built trust through dating apps before targeting victims' homes between 2003 and 2004. So, this woman who is a viral OnlyFans person, yeah, top people, this dead guy, right? Was going around, and according to the Los Angeles District Attorney, she would meet wealthy older men and young women, and across Beverly Hills, L.A., and she'd use those relationships she can't access, and then she'd come and rob you. Boy, these people just hang out with the best people now, don't they? So yeah, that is OnlyFans. The guy that started, he was making, well, millions of dollars per minute. That's how much he's been making off all of that filth. Bye bye, filthy loser. Bye bye. Anyway, another one bites the dust. What a shame. Okay, so another thing that I had to say here, which was relevant. Um, they're going through. Don't forget now that Iran is in the picture that the United States has been called the Great Satan or Big Satan, and it's still being used in the Muslim world and became frequently cited after the terrorist attack on September 11th, 2001. And the origin of the word little Satan in meaning Israel isn't so well known, but was cited in print a few months later. So, yeah, so the USA is still the great Satan, and Israel is the little Satan. You'll understand why because I'm talking about a lot about Satan today. Satan has some pretty strange views about women. So, anyways, I'll get to that in a minute. So, along with today, I'm going to be talking about. I have a couple clips I'm going to be playing in a minute here. We're going to be going all the way in on this MK7, the butterfly business. Why do you see butterflies all over the place? And Frank Olson will come into this picture. Frank Olson, they did a fabulous show about him on Wormwood. Frank Olson was one of the early people, scientists, starting off with all of this mind business. And well, it shows you the loyalty to these people because Frank Olson died by being tossed out of a window of a hotel room when he figured out what was going on and wanted to come clean. So this whole MK7 thing works into kind of an interesting thing with these butterflies and all that. And I keep running into dual operations. For example, I'm working on a huge file about all these children all over the place. The orphan trains in this country transported several 100,000 children around. And what I uncovered at the same time, they were transporting children out of the UK and they were transporting those children around to Canada, Australia, New Zealand, and South Africa. So what I'm finding are more and more of these dual operations going on. So always keep your eyes out for that. Because with this MK7 business, I talked about this quite a bit in the last show that I did about psychopaths, NATO, and Cleckley and Robert Hare. And I'm pretty certain, well, as certain as I can be, but remember all of the records were destroyed, but I'm pretty certain that Cleckley was the godfather, likely, of all this Monarch business and all this stuff. So I'd like to point out a couple things. There's a couple of names that will keep coming up. There's a woman named Kathy O'Brien. She's still alive. The person she was with named Mark Phillips. Mark is dead now, but they talk a lot about the MK Ultra mind control business called Project Monarch, okay? And Kathy O'Brien talks about her experience. Kathy has a little bit, well, I wouldn't consider her a reliable source, okay? And I'm going to point out a couple of other people. John DeCamp will come up, and also Paul Bonacci. Paul Bonacci shows up in the Franklin case, and John DeCamp. John DeCamp ties to um, William Colby, the ex CIA director. John DeCamp and him were very good friends. John DeCamp and Colby were also involved in Operation Baby Lift out of Vietnam, another area where lots of children were stolen. So we only found out about Vietnam because the first plane crashed. But when Vietnam was closing up, planes were starting to take off with lots of children who I would say most of them were likely stolen. And the only reason we know about it is because sadly the first plane that took off crashed and most of those kids got killed. But and that I believe is the only reason we know about that operation. But we do know about it. It did happen. Those children were flown all over the place. Nobody knows what happened to those children. So anyway, so the name John DeCamp and Paul Bonacci will come up. John DeCamp was there to spin the whole thing. So, and he brings in Paul Bonacci to the story. Neither one of them would be reliable. So, just be careful who you're going to be listening to if you go out looking for yourself, because these people, it's all about what they leave off, okay? Because the best example I can give you is like that guy David Icke. You know, he runs around talking about the people being lizards, lizard people, and all that stuff. Well, David Icke's been around for years, and what'll happen is this: is that let's say you become a fan of David Icke's and you become enthusiastic and you tell all your friends about all this stuff he's telling you, because most of the stuff these people are going to tell you is going to be the truth, right? What you got to look for is where do they spin off the road, right? And that's why I choose not to listen to these people. I don't want to be sitting there wondering when they spin off the road. So anyway, so yeah, so let's say you tell your friends about David Icke and how great he is and all the great stuff you've learned, and people are like, wow, that's great. Well, then let's say a couple of the friends in the group look further themselves. Well, what do they run across? Well, they run across David Icke talking about lizard people, that kind of stuff. So, what it does is it destroys your credibility because your friends won't hate you. They won't stop calling you. They'll still call you up for dinner and stuff, but they'll look at you a little bit differently in the future, right? You'll still be their friend. They'll still love you for all the right reasons and stuff. But there'll be that little thing in their minds because when they run across a part about David Icke talking about lizard people, they're going to go, all of this information is just too crazy. So that's basically why you want to stay away from these people because they're going to lead you to nowhere. Same thing with Nick Bryant. Nick Bryant came along and wrote a book about the same thing. Nick Bryant happened to have stayed at John DeCamp's house in Nebraska for a few months. Well, you think Nick Bryant didn't know about John DeCamp and all the stolen children out of Vietnam? Well, he's got to be a horrible researcher if he didn't know about that part. But yeah, so they've all got more dirt than I would be comfortable with, okay? Because Operation Baby Lift happened April 1975 during the final days of Vietnam, and I have a pretty big axe to grind against anybody that is stealing and carrying out children. What happened was how they got caught was a U.S. Air Force C-5 Galaxy carrying children and caregivers crashed shortly after takeoff from Saigon. Hundreds were on board. Many died, often about cited as about 138 fatalities. And that is why the operation became well known because that first plane, they were in such a rush. Those kids were thrown in. They didn't even have, it was a mess, okay? I'm talking a mess. And yeah, and so that whole operation, now people are asking a lot of questions. Were those children really orphans? What about consent? Yeah, and so Operation Baby Lift was a U.S. run evacuation at the end of Vietnam involving military and intelligence infrastructure. And William Colby just happened to be over there in Saigon at the same time. So, yeah, of course they all connect. Another name you'll run across if you dig a little bit deeper. This is a man that I talked about, years ago. His name, he goes under the name D.C. Hammond, Hammond. He is a very brave doctor, and he he had a thing called hypnosis and MPD ritual abuse, multiple personality disorder ritual abuse. But the speech he gave is now known as the Greenbaum speech, and I have links to all of this down below. And that was delivered in 1992. And he basically, the 1992 lecture claimed the existence of organized, systematic mind control programming using hypnosis in ritual abuse context. And what's a big deal about this is that, well, it's a huge deal because this guy came right out and said it, right? That it's being used on a wide scale. Well, nobody heard much from him after that. So what happened was these claims became widely circulated in certain circles in the 1990s. And um, the bottom line is this: he's still alive. I just looked and found out. Dr. Hammond is still alive. He's retired. He's out of public discourse. And basically, what happened was that he got under severe threat by people, threats of murder, all that kind of stuff. So I don't speak for anybody but myself, but I guess he pulled back because of concern for his family. So anyway, so yeah, that was the first real case of a real doctor and stuff coming out and saying, yes, it is. It's hypnosis that's doing this stuff. So it's a pretty big deal, because these claims they became circulating in certain circles. But mainstream psychology and psychiatry have not validated those claims. Hammond himself later distanced himself from some of the more extreme interpretations. Well, like I said, I don't speak for the guy, but I think he got scared off, and that's what happens, right? People get afraid and they run. So, yeah. Well, at least I didn't get afraid and run, right? Because I'm crawling to the microphone. Okay, so I'm going to read you a piece right now that will kind of put this thing into perspective here, okay? This whole thing about women. I have the full article down below. We talk of women in Saudi Arabia, but in Chicago in 1912, a woman could be fined for showing too much leg. Ben Heck recalls the police arrested women for smoking cigarettes, for shopping without their corsets on, for using profanity, for wearing slacks and shorts, for kissing in public, for wearing a man's hat, for sitting alone in a cafe or drinking in a saloon, for driving an automobile without a male in attendance, for putting too much paint on their faces or cutting their hair too short. This is a reminder that Western civilization is based on Christian values. These proscriptions were extreme, but they had a sound basis. They were designed to channel women into the role of wife and mother, as opposed to sexual free agents and amateur prostitutes. Kabbalists, Jews, and Freemasons removed those taboos by promoting infidelity and sexual promiscuity as liberation. Women were deprived of their natural role, nurturing husband and children, and many are now isolated and lost, binging on alcohol, drugs, and sex. These occult forces are gradually inducting us into their sex cult without our knowledge. Secular is their term for satanic. The freedom they trumpet is freedom from the spiritual discipline necessary to resist debauchery and grow healthy and happy. Our concepts of freedom, truth, human dignity, and fair play are founded in Christianity. Specifically, that this is the belief that humans all have a soul which allows them to hear and obey God, i.e., perfection. God is ultimate reality, which is moral and spiritual in character. Be ye therefore perfect as thy Father, who art in heaven, is perfect. Until we recognize that mankind is in the grip of a powerful satanic force, we will remain defenseless. Elite social engineers are waging an undeclared war on society. By subverting sexual roles and separating sex from marriage and procreation, they hope to divert, degrade, sedate, and finally control us. Re engineering women to be sluts. A spate of books exhorts women to overcome their inhibitions about having casual sex. In The Happy Hookup from 2004, feminist authors Alexa Sherman and Nicole pretend to be offering women options, as with careers. Typically, their real agenda is coercive and subversive to prevent women from getting married and starting families. Cultural norms will catch up with us if we give them no choice, the authors write. We as females need to show the world that sex without commitment is absolutely our prerogative. Say I'm a slut, I'm a whore, I love sex, and mean it. Society needs to change and begin to encourage women to find pleasure for pleasure's sake. Pleasurable sex in the context of a loving marriage wasn't mentioned as an option. This perverse propaganda is yet another assault on marriage and family, the institutions that sustain us both as individuals and as a society. For centuries, London based Masonic bankers have used sexual liberation, sex unfettered by bonds of marriage and love, to undermine society in advance of their totalitarian New World Order. Women are naturally monogamous. Surveys indicate they do not find casual sex satisfying and mostly regret it. Thus, Happy Hookup is devoted in the book to helping women overcome their natural instinct to become attached. Women are instructed not to get to know their sexual partner too well. Try not to discuss too much about your past or future or his. That said, it never hurts to inquire about his sexual history and gauge what risks are involved. Then focus on the action and the action alone. They are told to terminate the relationship after one or two trysts and distance themselves with work or hobbies. Don't think about what's going to happen next, whether he's going to call you, want you, and be your everything. It's just not going to happen, honey. At least don't expect it. Stay in control. Excuse me. Accept that. That's it. Finito. The end. Flip him over. He's done. Anonymous sex and promiscuity is the ultimate step in divorcing sex from its procreational function. Nature made sexual attraction for the purpose of making families. This is why qualities like character, loyalty, and innocence are important. It amazes me that women obsess over being sexually attractive, yet don't realize that the most attractive quality is not physical at all. It is spiritual, innocence, goodness, and love. The promotion of promiscuity is designed to sexually sterilize women. According to the Bible, Eve was the first to heed Satan's advice to eat of the forbidden fruit. The notion of women as the devil's accomplice is prominent throughout the history of Christianity. During the 19th century, rebellious females performed counter readings of the mis- the tradition. Hereby, Lucifer was reconceptualized as a feminist liberator of womankind, and Eve became a heroine. In those reimaginings, Satan is an ally in the struggle against patriarchy, supported by God the Father and his male priests. So let's take a look at these Bibles. Well, the Protestant Christians, they have 66 books. 66, kind of suspicious, right? The Catholic Church, including the Vatican, has 73 books. The Eastern Orthodox Church has 75 to 81 books. And Islam, with the Quran, only has one book. So, where did it go from there? Well, there's no single author of the Genesis, the book of Genesis. It was written by many authors and editors. It was written over 1,000 years. The final shape, and this is where I did a backflip around, because what I do at the end of when I'm looking into something is I always move the ending to the top, right? Because there's no reason to bury the lead, make you sit. Oh, I'm going to talk for 2 hours, and I'll tell you at the very end what's going on. So I always move everything to the top, and so I was going through my usual questions, like, okay, what is this Bible? Let me try to figure this stuff out first of all, and then I started reading Hebrew, and I thought, Hebrew, wait a minute, Hebrew, and then I thought, well, wait a minute. So then I thought, well, who reads this particular Bible? In other words, which one of these people reads this Bible? Well, this Bible is mainly read by the Ashkenazi Jews. So yeah, so because like I said, I only thought there was like one Bible, right? So so yeah, the book of Genesis is read by the Ashkenazi Jews. So it was written by many authors and editors, and the final shape largely formed after the Babylonian exile. And it comes from the Hebrew Bible itself. And that's why I flipped around that Hebrew Bible. Wait a minute. This must be the Bible the Ashkenazi Jews read. And it is. So, so what happened was this was that, hold on a second. So over 1,000 years ago, a bunch of them get together before the Babylonian exile, and they come up with this Genesis, right? And the book of Genesis, the very first book. So the meaning has been shaped heavily by later interpretations by the Jewish, the Christian, and the others over centuries. But the Ashkenazi Jews read Genesis in Hebrew. And these passages that I was reading earlier, I mean, not today, but earlier, about women being so evil and evil. The whole thing gets really weighted down by, well, Eve took a bite of that apple because Satan told her to, so Eve must be Satan, right? So, yeah, this is the root of where all this about women comes from. So, but it's interesting that the first Bible is the Genesis, and that just happens to be the Bible that the Ashkenazi Jews read. I mean, just it's just something to take note of, right? So, what belongs to Ashkenazi Jews specifically? They do read Genesis as part of the Tanakh. They do discuss Eve and the fall. And the Tanakh, which includes Genesis, is their foundational scripture. It is the text that they use for synagogue readings, especially the Torah portion each week, religious study, and law and tradition as a base layer. So the core passage people are referring to is in Genesis 3. And it says, the serpent speaks to Eve. Eve eats it, gives it to Adam. But when confronted, Adam blames Eve, and Eve points to the serpent. So God declares enmity between the serpent and the woman. So this is where Eve, the women become evil, right? So the verse Genesis 3:15 says this: conflict between the serpent and the woman and their offspring. So it means a symbolic, ongoing conflict between good and evil over that business of eating the apple, okay? Some teachers interpret this as, well, I see this as where the hatred of women comes from, right? And what do their people say? Well, they say that Satan targets women specifically. Women are uniquely opposed by evil. Therefore, women face spiritual opposition, suppression, and blame. This interpretation is often used in deliverance teachings and women in ministry frameworks. So it says that there is conflict and that the woman is part of that conflict. And the serpent is opposed to humanity through her line. So, yeah, the Adam and Eve dynamic. Adam blames Eve. Eve identifies the serpent. And different traditions interpret this differently. Some emphasize blame shifting, breakdown of responsibility. Others emphasize the beginning of human conflict and hierarchy. And there's also the Talmud plays into this. But let me just keep going here. So, so where it comes from is this: Genesis symbolism, meaning the serpent versus the woman. And then later, it gets interpreted through other theologies. And then it becomes cultural history of gender roles. And then it becomes modern teaching frameworks, especially ministry focus. So The Bible describes a conflict between the serpent and the woman, which would be Eve in Genesis, but it does not explicitly teach that Satan uniquely hates women. That idea that Satan hates women comes from later interpretations that expand the symbolism into a gender specific framework. So, it basically, according to the story here, it started out the ancient text is Genesis, written in 1000 to 500 BCE. And what exists is that the serpent deceives Eve, Adam blames Eve, and God declares enmity between the serpent and the woman. So, and then there are some early Jewish interpretations from 200 BCE to 500 CE, and that comes from the Talmud, that really reliable Jewish thing. So that expands the discussion of Eve's role, the deception, and the consequences of all this fall. So, yeah, it all started with Genesis, okay? The book that the Ashkenazi Jews just happened to read. So, if you think, gee, you're starting to sound kind of suspicious, yeah, I am very suspicious. This puts one more nail on my suspicion about that Bible, right? If the first Bible, the Genesis, is the favored Bible of the Ashkenazi Jews, who I would say are the Gypsies, used to be the Habsburgs and all those people. Yeah, I would say the Bible, as of right now, if he didn't think I was suspicious of it before, I am very, very suspicious of how this whole Bible got started to begin with. So, but the whole idea about was Eve evil for biting on that apple? Well, it came from them. So I don't know. Did Eve even bite an apple? I mean, these people likely wrote it. So was it written with a slant so that everybody in all these churches going forward would have a big hate for women? Yeah, I would have to say so, right? Because Genesis 3 gets reinterpreted as direct hostility towards women. And then even in the modern teachings, the 2000s to present, some ministry courses, some online teachings, they often talk about Satan hates women. Women are uniquely attacked, and Eve is the entry point. So, yeah, like I said, I'm not going to go on for years over this Bible, but I think you need to hear what I'm saying. I think the fact that the Genesis starts off with all this Adam and Eve, the Noah business, and all this sketchy Bible business, well, to me, it now makes the Bible even more suspicious. If that were possible, yeah, I'm right there now at the even more suspicious phase. So, what I'm going to do now is I'm going to take a break and well, wait a second here. Let me read a little bit more of this first, and then I'll take a break and play these clips. So, the idea that Satan hates women is not stated in Genesis. It develops over time through layers of interpretation, beginning with the early blame placed on Eve, expanding in medieval theology, and becoming explicit in modern spiritual warfare teaching. So, yeah, so And so start with the base text. The book of Genesis gives a short narrative. Eve eats, Adam follows, blame is shifted, consequences are declared. So, so it was all these different they call them interpretation layers afterwards. So the first thing got laid down in Genesis, and then what happened was they had these interpretation layers. The first one was a Jewish interpretation layer, 0 to 500 CE, and that included the Midrash and the Talmud. And that, what happened then was rabbis expand the story to explore morality and responsibility. Some discussions critique Eve. Others emphasize Adam's responsibility or shared fault. Yeah, why didn't he knock that apple out of Eve's hand, is what I want to know. Get that out of your hand, Eve. So yeah, Adam didn't sound like a very stand-up guy in this whole thing, if you ask me. But anyway, so Multiple viewpoints exist at the same time. So, yeah, so then the next layer is early Christianity, 100 to 400 CE. And they come up with much stronger focus on Eve as the entry point of sin. Women are increasingly linked to temptation and moral weakness. So this is where it really shifts. And then the next layer, the medieval period, years 500 to 1500, theology mixes with social structures. Women are more susceptible to evil is the new word. Broader suspicion of women, witchcraft narratives. So let me see. Genesis is reinterpreted through spiritual warfare language. Claims appear like Satan targets women. Women are uniquely opposed. So, yeah. Um, but it all started with that very first thing. And this MK business, everybody's always wondering, what does MK mean? Well, I think MK might mean Mein Kampf, from the book. But MK also can mean a whole bunch of other things. What they do is they usually flood a target area, meaning, like, for example, when I go to look for something, the first thing I do is I pay attention to what people's faces look like and stuff, because then I'll be able to track them down the road. Because what they'll do is it's called flooding the zone. They'll flood the zone with all these other words which appear the same. So if you go to look, you'll become kind of confused and disoriented. So I have several things that I do myself when I'm looking. I remember what they look like. I focus on a few details because then when they show up later, I'll know I've still got the same person. And they've really flooded the zone with this MK business. You'll always hear like MK Ultra and all that, but it's still under question what the MK really means. But let me just give you some general ideas what MK has come to mean since then. MK could mean market. Mark could be Michael Kors, the designer. Magic Kingdom for Disney. MK could also be Mary Kay, the cosmetics people. Mario Kart, the video games. And I find a lot of when they flood the zone with stuff, you'll find a lot of movies and books and different things using that name, but it means something completely different. Maintenance Kid is MK. Monkey King film. Mushroom Kingdom, another video game. Mein Kampf, another MK, right? Master Key is MK. Macedonia, Mauritania, Mountain King, another grooming place, gaming place. Uh, Marvel Knight, another comic. Mercy Killing is MK. So there's a lot of words. Mystic Kingdom, another online gaming thing, MK. So there's a lot of things that start with MK. But where do we think this whole MK thing came from? Well, it likely came out of Austria. Austria is an area that I have been circling for a very long time. I just have not been able to tell you what I know about Austria, but I'm just going to share with you a little bit today. Austria, first of all, is the old Habsburgs hunting ground, okay? That was their main territory. Just keep that in your head, okay? The whole idea of mind control, there's an Austrian psychiatrist named Wilhelm Reich, can be considered the father of weather control and mind control. He pushed boundaries that later systems would formalize. Later programs like Project MK Ultra, which focused on breaking psychological resistance, altering perception and behavior, using drugs, isolation, stress, etc. So Reich was big into this whole thing, and it was over there in Austria. The whole Austria thing is a book in itself, but I can't go there today. Basically, Reich was initially a young rising figure under Sigmund Freud, and he's the one who came up with all this mind stuff, right? He pushed psychoanalysis towards sexual politics and Marxism. He was also expelled from the International Psychoanalytical Association. So he came up with his mind control and the weather control, but he also, well, I think he had some pretty serious things going on himself, right? So, and I'm just going to go over a couple of things here. when you start to find somebody like this William Reich thing who did all these things, well, it's always important to kind of take a look at where'd they come from. What could they possibly have been thinking about, right? Well, in this case, Reich was taught at home until he was 12, when his mother was discovered having an affair with his live-in tutor. Reich wrote about the affair in 1920 in his first published paper. He presented in the third person as though about a patient. He wrote that he would follow his mother when she went to the tutor's bedroom at night, feeling ashamed and jealous, and wondering if they would kill him if they found out that he knew. He briefly thought of forcing her to have sex with him on the threat of telling his father. In the end, he did not tell his father, but after a protracted period of beatings, his mother committed suicide on October, for which Reich blamed himself. Reich first met Sigmund Freud in 1919 when he asked Freud for a reading list for a seminar concerning sexology. It seems they left a strong impression on each other. Freud allowed him to start meeting with analytical patients in September that year. Although Reich was just 22 years old and still an undergraduate, which gave him a small income. He was accepted as a guest member of the Vienna Psychoanalytical Association, becoming a regular member in October of 1920, and began his own analysis. He lived and worked out of an apartment close to where Freud lived. One of Reich's first patients was Lorna Kahn, a 19-year-old young woman with whom he had an affair. Freud had warned analysts not to involve themselves with their patients, but in the early days of psychoanalysis, the warning went unheeded. According to Reich's diaries, um, Kahn, the young woman Kahn became ill and died of sepsis after sleeping in a bitterly cold room she had rented as a place for her and Reich to meet secretly, since his landlady and her parents had forbidden them to meet. Yeah, this is the guy. This is the guy. Yeah, he got expelled from the Communist Party. He got expelled from the International Psychoanalyst Association. His extreme focus on sexuality as a root of all social and psychological problems, his political writings tying sexual repression to fascism, he had increasingly unorthodox clinical practices. Reich alienated both scientific and political institutions, not just one side. And this is a guy, Wilhelm Reich, considered the father the father of weather control and mind control. Reich had two obsessions. His first obsession was the idea that he could acquire the advanced technology possessed by extraterrestrials. His second obsession was with sex. He believed that thought power or will was a form of biological energy, and that biological energy was principally sexual energy. He called his imaginary energy orgon from the word orgasm, and he performed strange experiments on people in an attempt to harness it. It is sexual energy which governs the structure of human feelings and thinking, says Wilhelm Reich. So Reich immigrated to the United States in 1939, right before the start of World War II. Gee, Austria's loss, America's gain, right? He ended up in New York. This suggests that he had the help of Illuminati Alexander Duncan Cameron, who was the father of Duncan Cameron, in getting a State Department visa, as well as his job doing research for the Navy and the CIA at Brookhaven National Laboratories. Reich's first accomplishment was to take free energy devices invented by Nikola Tesla, send these devices into the atmosphere with balloons, and change the weather. They were deceptively called radiosnodes, the claim being that they transmitted data to the ground. But they didn't transmit data because, as Preston Nichols demonstrated, there were no receivers on the ground. Reich's second accomplishment was to take the traditional satanic ritual abuse of the European nobility and turn it into a mind control weapon the CIA could use to program millions of children. In the pursuit of his dream of harnessing sexual energy, Reich experimented on children. Trauma based mind control, aka psychosexual programming, is a process of fracturing a child's personality through a combination of sexual abuse, electrical shocks, drownings, drugs, terror, and pain. Once the personality is split, subconscious programs are implanted in the docile personality, and the controller can switch the control, meaning the victim, from one personality to another through words or extremely low frequency radio transmissions. MK Ultra was created out of this research, and it was headed by a Luciferian named Ewan Cameron. Another prominent early figure was CIA chemist Sidney Gottlieb. And I have a page to read. I'm going to go ahead and read this page and then I'll play the clips. This is by a man named Ron Patton. I think Ron did an excellent job with all this writing of all this. I disagree with him 1,000,000% because I believe the word monarch, which is in fact the root for monarchy, you can look that up yourself. The word monarch, the word monarchy comes from the word monarch, okay? He doesn't see the connection, but I would die on this hill, okay? But let me read you what he has to say first, because he did an excellent job. He's interviewed a lot of witnesses, a lot of people who went through all this. A lot of this early MK7 stuff that we're talking about, I believe, was more geared toward higher level people, their own children, and that. I believe there was a dual operation going on at the same time, but I won't be getting into that today. But I believe 100% there was another operation that was going on at the very same time. But I have to stay focused on this one for today. So let me start reading here. A brief history of control. And this is the part that, of course, becomes fascinating. The mysterious religions of ancient Egypt, Greece, India, and Babylon helped lay the foundation for occultism, meaning hidden knowledge. One of the earliest writings given reference to occultism is the Egyptian Book of the Dead, a compilation of rituals explicitly describing methods of torture and intimidation to create trauma. The use of potions, drugs, and the casting of spells, hypnotism, ultimately resulted in the total enslavement of the initiative. These have been the main ingredients for a part of the occultism known as Satanism throughout the ages. During the 13th century, the Roman Catholic Church increased and solidified its dominion throughout Europe with the infamous Inquisition. Satanism survived this period of persecution, deeply entrenching itself under the veil of various esoteric groups. In 1776, a Bavarian Jesuit by the name of Adam Weishaupt was commissioned by the House of Rothschild to centralize the power base of the mystery religions into what is commonly known as the Illuminati, meaning enlightened ones. This was an amalgamation of powerful occult bloodlines, elite secret societies, and influential Masonic fraternities, with a desire to construct the framework for a new world order. The outward goal of this utopia was to bring forth universal happiness to the human race. However, their underlying intention was to gradually increase control over the masses, thus becoming masters of the planet. The Anglo Alliance. By the 19th century, Great Britain and Germany were recognized as the primary geographic areas of Illuminati control. It then should be of little surprise to note that the first work in behavioral science research was established in England in 1882, while much of the early medical and psychiatric techniques involved in mind control were pioneered at the Kaiser Wilhelm Institute in Germany. The Tavistock Institute of Human Relations was set up in London in 1921 to study the breaking point of humans. Kurt Lewin, a German psychologist, became the director of the Tavistock Institute in 1932. About the same time, Nazi Germany was increasing its research into neo-psychology and parapsychology and multi-generation occultism. Interestingly, a progressive exchange of scientific ideas was taking place between England and Germany, most notably in the field of eugenics. The movement devoted to improving the human species through the control of hereditary factors in mating. The nefariously enigmatic union between the two countries was bonded, partially through the Order of the Golden Dawn, a secret society which consisted of many high ranking officials in the Nazi Party and British aristocracy. Top SS Navy officer Heinrich Himmler was in charge of the scientific project called Lieberstorm, which included selective breeding and adoption of children, a particularly large number of twins among them. The purpose of the program was to create a super race, or Aryans, who would have total allegiance to the cause of the Third Reich or New Order. Much of the preliminary experimentation concerning genetic engineering and behavioral modification was conducted by Dr. Joseph Mengele at Auschwitz, where he coldly analyzed the effects of trauma bonding, eye coloring, and twinning upon his victims. Besides the insidious surgical experimentation performed at the concentration camp, some of the children were subjected to massive amounts of electroshock. Sadly, many of them did not survive the brutality. Concurrently, brainwashing was carried out on inmates at Dachau who were placed under hypnosis and given the hallucinogenic drug mescaline. During the war, parallel behavioral research was led by Dr. George Easterbrooks of Colgate University. His involvement with the Army, CID, FBI, and other agencies remained shrouded in secrecy. However, Estabrook would occasionally slip when discussing his work involving the creation of the hypno-programmed couriers and hypno-induced split personalities. After World War II, the U.S. Department of Defense secretly imported many of the top German Nazis and Italian fascist scientists and spies into the United States via South America and the Vatican. The code name for this operation was Project Paperclip. One of the more prominent recruits for the U.S. was German General Reinhard Geller, Hitler's chief of intelligence against Russia. Upon arriving in Washington, D.C. in 1945, Gellin met extensively with President Truman, General William Wild Bill Donovan, director of the OSS, and Allen Dulles, who would later become head of the CIA. The objective of their brainstorming sessions was to recognize the nominal American intelligence operation, transforming it into a highly efficient covert organization. The culmination of their efforts produced the Central Intelligence Agency in 1946, renamed in 47. Reinhard Gellin also had a profound influence in developing the National Security Council, from which the National Security Act of 1947 was derived. This particular piece of legislation was implemented to protect an unconscionable number of illegal government activities, including clandestine mind control programs. Evolution of Project MK Ultra, when the CIA and National Security Council firmly established the first in a series of covert brainwashing programs, was initiated by the Navy in the fall of 1947. The CIA decided to expand their efforts in the area of behavioral modification with the advent of Project Bluebird, approved by Director Allen Dulles in 1950. In August of 1951, Project Bluebird was renamed Project Artichoke, which evaluated offensive uses of interrogation techniques, including hypnosis and drugs. The program ceased in 1956. 3 years prior to the halt of Project Artichoke, Project MK Ultra came into existence on April the 13th, 1953. Ultra was the first U.S. program that addressed extraterrestrial contacts, which also revolved around technologies. Some of them say the presumed etymology of MK is that it stands for mind control. With the control is with a K, Kontrolle. A host of German doctors procured from the Nazi talent pool. So they say maybe that's how they got it. I don't know. I think it probably means Mein Kampf. So, of the 149 sub projects under the umbrella of MK Ultra having been identified, Project Monarch officially began by the U.S. Army in the early 1960s. Project Monarch could be best described as a form of trauma structured disassociation and occult integration in order to compartmentalize the mind into multiple personalities within a systematic framework. During the process, a satanic ritual, usually including Kabbalistic mysticism, is performed with the purpose of attaching a particular demon or group of demons to the corresponding altars. There are an inordinate amount of altars in the victim survivor with numerous backup programs, mirrors, and shadows. A division of light side good and dark side bad altars are interwoven in the mind and rotate on an axis. One of the main internal structures, of which there are many within the system, is shaped like a double helix, consisting of 7 levels. Each system has an internal programmer who oversees the gatekeepers or the demons, who grant or deny entry into the different rooms. A few of the internal images predominantly seen by victims and survivors are trees, the Kabbalistic tree of life with adjoining root systems, infinity loops, ancient symbols and letters, spider webs, mirrors or glass shattering, masks, castles, mazes, demons, monsters, aliens, seashells, butterflies, snakes, ribbons, bows, flowers, hourglasses, clocks, robots, chain of command diagrams. So, yeah, a majority of the victim survivors, and this is where we pay attention, okay? A majority of the victim survivors come from multi generational satanic families or bloodlines and are ostentationally programmed to fulfill their destiny as the chosen ones or chosen generation, a term coined by Mengele at Auschwitz. Some are adopted out to families of similar origin. Others used in this neurological nightmare are deemed as the expendable ones, the non bloodliners, usually coming from orphanages, foster care homes, or incestuous families with a long history of pedophilia. There also appears to be a pattern of family members affiliated with government or military intelligence services. Stuart Switterflow is a Montauk survivor who was in the Illuminati mind control and genetic breeding program for 13 years, beginning in the 1970s. He was finally able to deprogram himself and has been lecturing and writing books ever since. In the book Blue Blood, True Blood, he describes the Luciferian child sacrifice rituals that regularly took place at his Montauk base. He claims that many prominent people took part, including Sir Lawrence Gardner, William F. Buckley, Sean Connery, Spiro Agnew, Henry Kissinger, John F. Kennedy Jr., the Shah of Iran, and numerous other actors, military personnel, and Middle Eastern figures whose names I do not know. So, yes, it is a generational thing. And there's more about this Montauk project. It starts off with Crowley. The starting proof of Crowley's association developed very long. I'm not going to be able to read this whole article, but it's all down below. It starts with Aleister Crowley is in the picture again. And I have the complete article down below. I'm going to be taking a break right now. I'm going to be playing this clip. It goes on for about 35-40 minutes. I picked 3 clips, which I think really tell the message because there's a lot to try to unpack and absorb here. But the bottom line is this is where all this business about women being evil comes from. And this is why women have always been second-class citizens and all that. It came from that Bible. So hang on for a second. I'll be back on the other side.
April 13th, 1953, CIA Director Allen Dulles gave a speech about the dangers of communism and the war of the mind. The federal government was haunted by the fear of communism and believed it spread rapidly at this time because the Soviets mastered the art of mind control. Sandwiched between the aftermath of World War II and the beginnings of the Cold War, intelligence agencies believed foreign brainwashing could indoctrinate the American people. As a result, a classified project was created to emulate the communist mind control programs, effectively fighting fire with fire. There are several speculations as to why MK began, but one fact remains. People in power justified pushing the boundaries of known science and warfare by committing human rights violations under the guise of intelligence. MKUltra's clandestine tests took place in universities, hospitals, prisons, and pharmaceutical centers all across the United States and Canada. One of the most famous testing sites was the Allen Memorial Institute, or the Ravenscrag, at McGill University in Montreal. These top-secret experiments and procedures were led by Sidney Gottlieb, the United States spy master and mad chemist who financed and developed, quote, techniques that would crush the human psyche to the point that it would admit anything. MKUltra was preceded by Project Bluebird and Project Artichoke, 2 projects originating in the 1940s. The goal of Project Bluebird was to train subjects through hypnosis and behavior modification so that it would be impossible for enemies of the United States to extract vital information. The goal of Project Artichoke was to examine if a human is capable of attempting an assassination without hesitation. Methods used include hypnosis, forced substance addiction, and forced substance withdrawal. MKUltra, the final evolution of its 1940s predecessors, employed a variety of techniques to influence the minds and brains of its subjects, including the covert administration of high doses of psychoactive substances, in most cases LSD, also known as lysergic acid diethylamide, a powerful hallucinogen. This CIA project used a cocktail of chemicals and drugs such as barbiturates, amphetamines, and hallucinogens to put their subjects in a comatose state, while also violently snapping them back to reality. This was carried out by injecting a barbiturate in a subject's arm and then an amphetamine in the other, often resulting in death. One of the main scientists responsible for the horrific practices of MKUltra was Dr. Donald Ewan Cameron. Cameron invented 2 medical torture techniques that were repeated until the unwilling subject's mind was effectively broken, though not all subjects received the same treatment or torture. First, Cameron utilized a technique known as psychic driving. Patients were frequently exposed to hundreds of thousands of repeats of a single remark, which would theoretically change their behavior. Then, the subject met the wrath of Cameron's second technique. Depatterning was the chronological successor to psychic driving, which is when the test subject undergoes massive doses of electroconvulsive therapy, combined with equally large doses of psychedelic drugs. One can only imagine what truly happened to some of these people, where they are now, and if they remember anything, if they survived.
Tell me about the acid.
I'd rather not. It's a bad trip. It's a bad trip. That was a bad trip. The pain was so excruciating. Felt like somebody was sticking me with 1,000,000 pins. You know, just everywhere. Oh, it just... Oh. You want to start for me?
With any classified project, intelligence agencies across the globe go through every effort to stay hidden. One method of cryptic language used by the CIA is known as cryptonyms. A cryptonym is a code name or code word used by the CIA to reference operations, people, projects, or other agencies. All CIA cryptonyms that are now used online were used between the 50s and 80s, which means it is more than likely the entire system has been replaced. All that exists online are partial lists and probable definitions. There is no way to know for certain the exact meanings and extent of these declassified projects. Each CIA cryptonym has a 2-character prefix known as a digraph, which identifies a region or function. But over time, certain digraphs underwent changes. The Soviet Union digraph, for instance, underwent at least 2 changes. For example, in the 1950s, the Soviet Union was known as AE, but in the 80s, it was PD. The remaining words are either random dictionary words, cryptonyms that occasionally combine to produce dictionary words, like aeroplane, or can be read out as short phrases, like Wybather, which is pronounced why bother. MK Ultra is a cryptonym that denotes the following: MK equals TSS, or the Technical Services Staff, and Ultra being the highest classification of intelligence during World War II. There are plenty of unidentified cryptonyms, which lends itself to the fact that there is so much information kept from us, and we may never know it. Elizabeth Nixon is a Canadian writer and journalist who, in 1994, published the novel The Monkey Puzzle, an account of CIA brainwashing trials in Montreal during the 1950s and 60s. The height of MK Ultra. She explains that her mother was under the care of none other than Ewan Cameron. By this time, Cameron was head of the American Psychiatric Association. He had been a friend of Alan Dulles, who, if you remember, is the man responsible for the genesis of MK Ultra. In fact, they shared a long history together, dating back to the Nuremberg trials. In 1977, after President Ford's executive order, under the release of the U.S. Freedom of Information Act, Cameron was discovered to have conducted the most extreme mind control trials, employing massive amounts of shock treatments and drugs such as PCP and LSD. You may be wondering, did Cameron's extreme methods lead to the cure of cancer or Alzheimer's or anything? Well, according to journalist Sid Taylor in an article from 1992, Cameron used a toxin known as Curare in order to debilitate his patients while conducting research. This toxin was used by South American natives to poison their hunting arrows. When applied to the body, it shuts down the neuromuscular system. The article continues by saying, although the patient was prepared by both prolonged sensory isolation, repeated depatterning, and recorded receiving 101 days of psychic driving, no favorable results were obtained. So as you can guess, this was around the time Dr. Cameron fashioned his own invasive forms of therapy, explained before as depatterning and psychic driving. Much of this information has only been disclosed relatively recently, since the CIA has admitted to funding human behavior control research at 150 institutions, including 44 universities and a variety of hospitals, prisons, and drug rehab clinics. Remember, these are just the ones declassified. In 1953, while attending a CIA retreat, a scientist working for the agency drank a cocktail that had been spiked with LSD. His name was Frank Olson. A few days later, on November 28, 1953, Olson allegedly committed suicide by falling from the window of a New York City hotel room. 41 years after his death, in 1994, Frank Olson's family decided to have a second autopsy performed. A forensics team discovered injuries on the body that were most likely caused before the fall. Following lengthy legal proceedings, Olson's family was awarded a $750,000 settlement and a personal apology from President Gerald Ford and the then CIA Director William Colby. And the person named for administering the LSD to Frank Olson was none other than Sidney Gottlieb, by this time known as the Black Sorcerer. and dirty trickster. Ask yourself, if there was zero truth to the conspiracy surrounding Olson's death, why would the sitting president and CIA director give a personal apology? Why would the United States court rule to award Olson's family with what would almost be $9 million in today's money? While a college student at Stanford University, Ken Kesey, author of the 1962 novel One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, volunteered for MK Ultra LSD experiments. Kesey later went on to promote the drug by hosting acid tests, which were LSD-fueled parties. These parties incorporated drug use with musical performances by bands such as the Grateful Dead, as well as psychedelic effects. These parties influenced the early development of hippie culture and sparked the psychedelic drug scene in the 1960s. The dichotomy of Frank Olson and Ken Kesey is, on one hand, you have a guy who could have been murdered by the CIA because of his involvement with their psychoactive drug testing, while another guy involved in similar testing went on to spark hippie culture. It wasn't just a good time for the hippies, though. Operation Midnight Climax was an MK Ultra project in which government hired prostitutes enticed unsuspecting men to CIA safe houses across San Francisco, California, and New York City. The CIA would administer LSD through drinks or aerosols to the men and then observe their behavior while crushing a couple of cold ones behind a two-way mirror. It is noted that the program had little oversight and leadership. The agents involved admitted to a loose, party-like atmosphere where they themselves engaged with the prostitutes and used drugs. George White, a CIA agent working under Operation Midnight Climax, wrote to Sidney Gottlieb in 1971, stating, "Of course, I was a very minor missionary, actually a heretic, but I toiled wholeheartedly in the vineyards because it was
fun, fun, fun. Where else could a red-blooded American boy lie, kill, and cheat, steal, deceive, rape, and pillage, with the sanction and blessing of the All-Highest?"
It would be sooner than later that the truth would be revealed, and the intelligence communities would be made to answer for their illegal and inhumane enterprise. You see, in 1972, the Watergate scandal triggered paranoia amongst Washington and the already weary American people. This led to newly appointed CIA Director Richard Helms ordering all MK Ultra files destroyed, coupled with anecdotal stories such as U.S. Army servicemen spying on civilians spread, eventually culminating in a New York Times article by Seymour Hersh in 1974. Seymour Hersh was already a well-known investigator, as he gained worldwide recognition for covering the Watergate scandal and by exposing the My Lai massacre, for which he was awarded the Pulitzer Prize for international reporting. Many elected officials, journalists, whistleblowers, and investigators, like Seymour Hersh, were following a rat's trail that eventually led them to an entire den. Hersh's New York Times article claimed the CIA had violated its charter by spying on anti-war activists. His story is credited as a major factor in the establishment of the Church Committee, which was created to investigate illegal federal intelligence operations. However, it ended up taking the combined might of the Church Committee, Pike Committee, and Rockefeller Commission to find the truth of MK Ultra, after discovering documents that failed to be destroyed in Helms's purge. These three forces would pressure not only the CIA, but the NSA, FBI, and IRS to answer for any wrongdoing or illegal activity. Thus, in 1976, 3 years after MK Ultra was halted, Executive Order 11905 was drafted and signed by President Gerald Ford after the Church Committee and Pike Committee revealed classified information concerning the United States. This executive order would be an effort to outlaw, restructure, and reform much of the intelligence community, creating greater checks and balances to ensure that any and all activities are in conformity with the Constitution and United States laws. Even people to this day are still concerned that this was not enough justice and that intelligence agencies still work above the law.
I haven't worried about it. Your question again, what would I have thought had I known that
Any of these substances would
have been given to
unwitting persons?
You mean a hostile agent of another government?
No, I mean
think that was probably one of the things they had in mind.
I mean testing it out on an American citizen.
I guess I must seem very, very cold-blooded about this, but I don't recall ever having been very much preoccupied with that issue.
A national security agency's capability at any time could be turned around on the American people, and no American would have any privacy left. Such is the capability to monitor everything. Telephone conversations, telegrams, it doesn't matter. There would be no place to hide. If a dictator ever took over, the NSA could enable it to impose total tyranny, and there would be no way to fight back. Frank Church, founder of the Church Committee. Today, MKUltra methods and stories have been glorified in pop culture. For example, the show Stranger Things is based off of the Montauk Project, which may not be true, but shares great similarities with MKUltra. Themes of mind control, manipulation, and tall men in suits coming to take you away. Another reference is The Truman Show, where, spoiler alert, Jim Carrey as Truman Burbank lives in a fake world constantly being manipulated, recorded, and probably drugged. On social media, conspiracy theorists believe prominent celebrities and figures such as Lady Gaga and Bill Clinton are speculated to have been affected by MKUltra hypnosis. Though this is from TikTok, so before your eyes melt through your sockets, we'll move on to an astronaut named Heidi Marie Stefansson Piper, who fainted during a press conference, supposedly being hypnotized before she could reveal secrets on UFOs. Though these references to MKUltra are enjoyable, they are loosely based in reality. A more modern and popular rumor that surrounds MKUltra is whether or not cult leader Charles Manson was a byproduct of CIA psychoactive substance testing. I mean, you take one look at the guy and you know he's mentally boiled. There was also Ted Kaczynski, known as the Unabomber, who allegedly took part in a Harvard LSD study overseen by the CIA and professor at Harvard University, Henry A. Murray. Ted took part in intense mock interrogations designed to assess limits of psychological breaking points. From 1978 to 1995, the Unabomber would later go on to create increasingly sophisticated bombs and mail them out to people, resulting in 3 people being killed and 23 others injured. It begs the question, was this violence a result of the manipulation and arguable torture Ted endured? There is no way of knowing if the CIA has stopped all illegal domestic activity against civilians. MKUltra may have evolved or rebranded itself, hidden deep within the CIA web, where no one would dare enter. One can speculate that CIA counterintelligence strategies have become more desperate and covert, adding to the fear that there may be some project out there worse than MKUltra. After all, science and technology have only advanced since the 1950s. If contemporary projects similar to MKUltra were to get green-lit, they would without a doubt be more effective and efficient.
Most Western cultures see the butterfly as elegant, graceful, and full of beauty. It's a symbol usually attributed to life, hope, or remembrance of a loved one. So why is it that the Illuminati frequently use this symbol to mark their subjects of mind control, otherwise known as Monarch programming, MKUltra, MK Naomi, or Manchurian candidates? Make no mistake, mind control is a real thing. The CIA programs MKUltra and MK Naomi are declassified programs which ran from 1953 to 1973 and engaged in illegal activities of subjecting unwilling participants to drug use, hypnosis, sensory deprivation, verbal and sexual abuse, and other forms of psychological torture to control their minds. And you thought it was only the Nazis. There's a ton of information out there on MKUltra, and there's a wealth of information on the internet about its history. However, we're going to look at the mechanisms of mind control developed by the CIA as still being used in the entertainment industry and how it applies to the symbol of the butterfly. Hey everybody, this is Mike with On Point Preparedness. The elite, the Illuminati, controllers, handlers, whatever you want to call them, they always leave symbols in plain sight to mark their work. As you can see from these series of pictures, several celebrities are frequently seen with the monarch butterfly. It is especially occult when you see them place the butterfly over one eye or over the mouth. There are so many instances of this very odd placement of a butterfly that one has to question exactly what meaning they are trying to convey. If you do some searching around the internet, you'll find a very common explanation. Just as the monarch butterfly goes through metamorphosis, these controllers or handlers of these celebrities are using mind control techniques to morph the minds of their subjects. Probably one of the most blatant examples of this is with the celebrity Amanda Bynes. You can see her here in this milk commercial with the butterfly on her nose and the word metamorphosis below. Supposedly, they are saying the milk is the cause of the metamorphosis. However, just with any other MK Ultra subject, their mind breaks down from repeated insults. Here you see Amanda, who was a perfectly normal, talented, and strong actor/singer, completely lose her mind, shave half of her head, and post a series of very strange Twitter videos, such as this one where she is twitching and jerking her facial expressions as she poses for a selfie. However, there is a much deeper meaning to the butterfly symbol, and I really don't believe you've seen this anywhere else. At least I haven't. The following quote is attributed to the Dalai Lama. As opposed to the picturesque view of a butterfly that Westerners have, the Dalai Lama says the butterfly is actually a very cold symbol. He says, quote, "The butterfly never meets its mother. It must survive independently and remains a stranger to affection. An animal nurtured by mother's milk, however, is dependent on another for its basic survival. A child who grows up in a cold and detached home environment is similar to the butterfly, in that kindness is sparing. Once an adult, it'll be very difficult for that person to show compassion." The key to what the Dalai Lama said in that quote is that the butterfly is detached from its mother or family. And that's exactly what celebrity handlers try to do: distance the family as far as possible from their target. Here's a story of Billy Ray Cyrus talking about how his family is under attack by Satan, and how Miley's handlers were the main catalyst. He says, over time, something bad would happen in her career, and her handlers would try to get her dad in the picture so they could blame him for his parenting. It happened so much that Billy Ray had enough of it and decided to keep his distance. At this point, her handlers went wild and took total control of Miley. In this news clip, her handlers were, quote, concerned about a missing phone with incriminating pictures of Miley. Billy Ray asked her handlers what was going on, and they said, quote, "It was none of his business." He says, "I'm dealing with somebody that had only known my daughter for possibly 4 years, and I'm her daddy, and they're telling me it's none of my business?" From that point on, things just went downhill. He goes on later to say that his and Miley's faith was greatly shaken, and that this was definitely an attack by Satan. Indeed, it definitely is. So not only do we see metamorphosis of a butterfly symbolize MK Ultra modification, or how splitting a subject from their family is much like the independent life of a butterfly, there's also one more symbol. The butterfly on the exterior is very beautiful. However, it's very fragile as well. And this is exactly what these celebrities are. Behind all the professional photos that look like they have it together and are beautiful, their controllers and their handlers, the drug use, or whatever exposures they are going through, easily rip them apart like a frail butterfly's wings. You can see so many celebrities go through complete mental breakdowns after this programming starts to become too much. Britney Spears, Lindsay Lohan, Miley Cyrus, Amanda Bynes, and the list continues on and on and on. And there's not much else to say except the world is super evil, my friends. But we all know that there is one hope. As much as we hate to see these celebrities promote the Antichrist spirit, we must continually pray for them that they turn back to Yeshua, Jesus Christ, and the Father. Very much like we hope Kanye West is turning back to Yeshua based on all his very peculiar behaviors as of lately.
It's my first Instagram joint, you know what I'm saying, that I did, specifically ever for Instagram, you know what I'm saying, and I wanted to mean something, I wanted to make sense, so I want to give a special shout out to Kanye, you know what I'm saying, let him know that my prayers are with him, my family's prayers are with him, a reminder that when God is for you, who could be against you? No one and nothing. Stand strong, brother. Stand strong, brother. Stand strong. God is in your corner.
This is Mike with On Point Preparedness. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Until the next one, I'll catch you all later.
November 28th, 1953, New York City. At 2:30 a.m., the body hit the sidewalk. A few seconds later, a shower of glass. The doorman of the Statler Hotel yelled to the lobby that there was a jumper. The night manager rushed out and saw him. A man about 40 years old lying on the pavement. He was on his back wearing only his underwear, and blood started to pool around him. 13 stories up, a single window is open, its curtain flapping through broken glass. The night manager knelt beside the man, whose eyes were open and was somehow still alive. He desperately tried to speak but was choking on blood and couldn't be understood. After a minute or two of trying to communicate, the man took a final deep breath and was gone. Nobody knows for sure what he was trying to say before he died, but one thing is for certain, it was something about the CIA. Room 1018A was registered to Robert Lashbrook and Frank Olson. The police burst in, guns raised, but it was empty. Cold November air was blowing through the broken window. In the bathroom was a man sitting on the toilet, resting his head in his hands. He told the police he'd been sleeping, heard a noise, and woke up. One officer asked the name of the man who went out the window. The man in the bathroom said, Olson, Frank Olson. The responding officers figured this was an open and shut case. A middle-aged man is depressed or distraught and ends it all by jumping. Just another night in the big city. But the night manager, Armin Pastori, wasn't convinced. He said it didn't make sense that someone would get up in the middle of the night, run across a dark room in his underwear, avoid two beds, and dive through a closed window that had the shade and curtains closed. Pastori checked with the hotel operator to see if any calls were made from the room. The operator said, yes, a call was just made a few minutes ago. And because it ran through a switchboard, she heard the whole thing. The caller, Robert Lashbrook, who was the man in the bathroom, called a number on Long Island, which belonged to a Dr. Harold Abramson. The call lasted only a few seconds. Well, he's gone, Lashbrook said. Well, that's too bad, was Abramson's reply. A few hours later, Frank Olson's family was notified. They were told there was an accident. Frank had either fallen or jumped from his 10th floor room. Frank's body was so badly damaged that the funeral was held with a closed casket, and the Olson family tried to move on. Having trouble coping with losing his father, Eric Olson would ask his mother about Frank from time to time, and she would always say the same thing. You're never going to know what happened in the room that night. But 20 years later, that would change. In 1975, the Rockefeller Commission released information to the public about its investigation into CIA activities. The report mentioned a civilian scientist working for the Department of the Navy. He was given LSD without his knowledge as part of a CIA experiment. That scientist experienced side effects and was sent to New York for psychiatric care. A few days later, he jumped from a 10th floor window of his hotel and died. This report was in the New York Times and Washington Post and made its way to the Olson family. The government confirmed the scientist was Frank Olson. And just 10 days later, the family was invited to the White House, and President Ford gave them a formal apology. The director of the CIA also apologized. The United States government agreed this was a wrongful death. and offered the family a $750,000 settlement if they agreed not to sue. The Olson family agreed to the terms. Alice Olson never wanted to talk about Frank's death or his job. Frank's children, now in their 20s and 30s, always knew their father was a scientist, but what scientist family gets a personal invitation to the Oval Office? Alice Olson only knew a few things about her husband's job. She knew he was a scientist doing important work for the US government. She knew he traveled for work all the time, and she knew he was unhappy. One of the last things Frank said to his wife was that he had made a terrible mistake. But for Frank's children, this information was entirely new. And because of the investigations and media coverage, they now learned for the first time what their father actually did for a living. He was no ordinary scientist. During World War II, Frank Olson was one of the first Army scientists assigned to the top-secret biological warfare lab at Fort Detrick, Maryland. Frank's specialty was aerosolizing living biological agents and munitions. In other words, he created biological weapons of mass destruction. Now, at this time in history, the CIA was part of the Army. And after becoming a civilian, Frank continued his research in bioweapons. He was lead scientist for Operation Harness, where animals in the Caribbean were exposed to anthrax, tularemia, and brucella. He was part of Operation Sea Spray, where different strains of bacteria were sprayed over the San Francisco Bay Area to test the city's vulnerability to a bioweapon attack. And as Frank moved up the ranks of the CIA, he spent a lot of time at Fort Terry, which was a secret installation on Plum Island in the Long Island Sound. Plum Island is only reachable by boat or by air. The toxins tested there are considered too dangerous to be on the mainland. Olson developed delivery devices for these bioweapons, canisters disguised as shaving cream cans that could disperse anthrax in a concentrated area, a cigarette lighter that emitted a deadly gas, lipstick that killed instantly.
Hey, when did they make biological weapons a war crime?
The Geneva Conventions in 1925.
So all this research was
illegal.
Right.
In early 1953, the same year he died, Frank Olson stepped down as chief of the Special Operations Division. He said the job was too stressful and was causing his ulcers to flare up.
You think ulcers suck? Try anthrax.
Oh, no sympathy for CIA scientists, huh?
Not even a little bit.
So Frank stepped down, but he stayed with the CIA. And that's when he met Sidney Gottlieb and Robert Lashbrook.
Gottlieb. Ooh, where do I know that name from?
Well, Sidney Gottlieb ran the CIA's Project Bluebird, which became Project Artichoke, which became
MK Ultra.
Bingo. During the Cold War, the CIA, specifically Sidney Gottlieb, was obsessed with mind control and brainwashing. There was a fear that the Soviet Union was also working on this capability, and the United States was determined to get there first. Project MK Ultra was the program intended to accomplish this. MK Ultra was brutal and illegal. Over time, the experiments Frank Olson conducted and witnessed started to weigh on him. During one study, Frank Olson observed interrogations at CIA black sites in Germany. Detainees were called expendables.
I'm assuming these expendables were not aging action stars.
They were not. They were mostly suspected spies and security leaks.
Suspected, so not proven?
Nope, just suspected.
Friggin' spooks.
The expendables were subject to drug experiments, hypnosis, electric shocks, isolation, sexual abuse, and all kinds of torture. This was an effort to study not just the effects of extreme torture, but also brainwashing techniques and memory deletion. Many of these people were interrogated to death. In other instances, Frank Olson saw the results of his own weapons that were used on expendables. Some of those people died slowly and in agony. And even though Frank's wife didn't know any of the specifics, it was clear that Frank's work was becoming too much for him to bear. In November 1953, Frank Olson received an invitation for a pre-Thanksgiving retreat at a cabin on Deep Creek Lake. Gottlieb ran these retreats for scientists and staff pretty often. Deep Creek was a convenient place for Gottlieb. This was one of the locations where Americans were subjected to MK Ultra techniques against their will for decades. Frank Olson was there with 10 other scientists. The first day of the gathering was fine, nothing out of the ordinary. On the second day, after dinner, the men kicked back for a post-meal drink. Lashbrook, Gottlieb's second in command, pulled a bunch of glasses, and poured everyone a generous portion of Cointreau, which is
An excellent orange triple sec liqueur from France.
right. 20 minutes later, Gottlieb asked if anyone was feeling odd. A few of the men said they were. Gottlieb then told them that their drinks were spiked with a heavy dose of LSD.
Son of a...
Frank Olson was aware that the CIA had dosed entire villages in Europe to observe the results. Many innocent people died from these experiments, but he was surprised that he would be the unwitting subject of an experiment. And Frank didn't react well. A few days later, he submitted his resignation, but he was talked into staying. It was suggested that he see a psychiatrist to help him cope with the effects of the experiment and the stress of his work. Frank agreed. Lashbrook drove Frank Olson to New York to meet with Dr. Harold Abramson.
Yeah, this is the guy he called after the jump, right?
Yep. Dr. Abramson was actually an allergist that worked for the CIA. He pretended to be a psychiatrist, but Frank didn't know this. After a couple of sessions, Dr. Abramson convinced Frank to check himself into a hospital so he could recover from stress and exhaustion. Frank was actually fine with this. He was looking forward to the time off and was already picking out what books to bring with him. And that night, he and Lashbrook signed into the Statler Hotel, room 1018A. Frank had a nice conversation with his wife. She remembered him sounding more peaceful than he'd been in a long time. He watched a little TV and went to bed. At 2:30 a.m., he was dead on the street below the window. Over the next 12 hours, a cleanup and a cover-up by the CIA ensued. The police investigation was quickly closed. Frank Olson's family was told he died from jumping or falling out a window. About 20 years later, more details about MKUltra emerged, and the Olson family received a settlement. And almost 20 years after that, the case would take another turn. Frank Olson's wife Alice passed away in 1993. Their children decided to have Frank's body exhumed and reburied next to his wife. But Frank's children had an additional plan. They had James Starr, a medical examiner professor, conduct a second autopsy. Starr said there were no cuts on Frank's body and no shards of glass, which would have been expected by jumping through a window. And even though Frank landed on his back, his skull above his left eye had a blunt force trauma injury. He had another serious wound on his chest. Starr said of his findings,
I think Frank Olson was intentionally, deliberately, with malice aforethought, thrown out of the window.
Frank's sons sued the CIA again, but because of the agreement they signed in 1975, the judge had to dismiss the case. But the judge did say, even though the case couldn't proceed as a matter of law, the allegations made by the family against the CIA, though they sounded far-fetched, appeared to be the truth. Since the lawsuit couldn't proceed, Frank Olson's sons went to the press. They flat out said the CIA murdered their father and covered it up. They also produced interesting documents. In 1954, just a few months after Frank Olson's death, the CIA executed a document with the Department of Justice that gave the CIA authority to grant CIA employees immunity from any crime, including murder.
A license to kill.
Exactly. And there's a handbook released in 1953, the year of Frank's death, called the CIA Study of Assassination. It's fascinating and I'll link it below. It describes that the best way to assassinate a target is to drop them from at least 75 feet onto a hard surface. The manual says when successfully executed, it causes little excitement and is only casually investigated. In fact, the Mossad, the Israeli intelligence organization, used Frank Olson's death as an example of a perfect murder due to the skill with which it was executed. Now, while there is still no official admission of guilt from the CIA, I think it's pretty obvious what happened. Frank Olson was one of only a few scientists who could confirm that the United States used chemical weapons in the Korean War. This is something that's still only alleged, but there's a lot of evidence it happened. Korean and Chinese soldiers were suddenly coming down with cases of cholera, meningitis, and even plague. It's possible Frank Olson was directly involved in deploying these illegal weapons. Frank Olson was one of only a dozen or so people on Earth who knew the extent of MKUltra and other secret and illegal CIA operations. Frank Olson was a man who committed, or at least was part of projects that committed atrocities around the world. And he was dealing with a moral crisis and started voicing his concerns. He even quit, but the CIA wouldn't allow it. When he was dosed with LSD that night in November, it was a loyalty test. to see what scientists would say if they were exposed to the drug. Frank Olson failed that test and paid the ultimate price. But because of his death and the diligence of his family, many illegal CIA activities were exposed, and MK Ultra was almost destroyed. Almost. It continued for another 20 years before finally shutting down in 1973. At least, as far as we know, all the records were illegally destroyed. And not Sidney Gottlieb, Robert Lashbrook, or any of the senior scientists from MK Ultra were ever brought to justice. In fact, they all lived out their lives on fat pensions paid for by you and me. But the CIA promises that MK Ultra was the last time drug experiments were done on people against their will. And such atrocities absolutely could not and would not happen today. Why would they lie?
Okay, we don't have a whole lot to go here, so let me wrap up. This is actually the most important segment here. So, how did I get started on all of this? Well, because King Charles has a portrait, his official portrait, that red-looking one. He has a monarch, monarch butterfly on his shoulder in his official portrait. So anyhow, where did all this get started? Well, I think a lot of it got started by Gloria Steinem. In 1958, Gloria Steinem was recruited by the CIA to direct an informal group of activists called the Independent Research Service. And what happened was Steinem attended communist-sponsored youth festivals in Europe, published a newspaper, reported on other participants, and helped to provoke riots. One of Steinem's CIA colleagues was a person named Clay Faulkner. In the early 1960s, he became an editor of Esquire and published articles by Steinem, which established her as a leading voice for women's liberation. In 1968, as publisher of New York Magazine, Faulkner hired her as a contributing editor and then editor of Ms. Magazine in 1971. Warner Communications put up almost all the money, though it only took in 25% of the stock. And Ms. Magazine's first publisher was Elizabeth Foster Harris, a CIA-connected PR executive. So yeah, despite its anti-establishment image, Ms. Magazine attracted advertising from the cream of corporate America. It published ads for AT&T at the same time as women's. Yeah. So Gloria Steinem, not only did she get women to burn their bras and become a tax asset, right? By getting women to join the workforce, it also created a huge, huge amount of tax money, right? Get those children in the hands of low paid workers and get those women out there and getting tax dollars. So I would say feminism has done the most damage. There is no more fundamental. It depends on the family. It's part of the society. And I think this has all been about divide and conquer, nothing more than that, right? And Gloria Steinem, who probably is even a man behind that wig, was there to trick women into being liberated, get out there in the workforce. And today, they're doing the same thing. They're calling them trad wives, making them the butt of jokes and stuff. Oh, look at these women that want to stay home and raise the kids. Well, I would have to say, I think a lot of women came to a reckoning over COVID when they realized that, hey, probably staying home is a good idea, but I'm not going to go there right now, not my thing. So anyway, so let me get back here. So in recap, Project MK Ultra began in 1953 and was supposedly halted in 1973. It used numerous methods to manipulate its subjects, such as LSD. I took a lot of LSD in the late 60s. I think I took it about 1969, 1970, but then I didn't take it after that. Everybody was pretty much taking it during that frame. I can even remember at the concerts, they were walking around giving it away for free. Although my friends and I, we didn't take the free LSD, but we did take LSD at concerts because it was literally, I'm talking everywhere. And that was a peak time. But I never really, in looking back at all this stuff, I don't know how they ever thought that LSD was a good idea to get people on LSD and go out and do things because really, you're really not equipped to do things at that point, right? So, anyhow, so Then they came up with other methods, including electroshocks, hypnosis, sensory deprivation, isolation, verbal and sexual abuse, and other forms of torture. And Project MK Ultra was revealed to the public in 1975 by the Church Committee, named after Senator Frank Church of the United States Congress, and Gerald Ford's United States Presidential Commission on CIA activities within the United States, called the Rockefeller Commission. Investigative efforts were hampered by CIA Director Richard Helms' order that all MK Ultra files be destroyed in 1973. If you're confused about some of this stuff, you might want to go listen to my show that I did about the word psychopath and Cleckley. That was really kind of the forefront of all of this. So anyhow, so in 1977, a Freedom of Information Act, or FOIA, uncovered a cache of 20,000 documents relating to MK Ultra, which led to the hearings because all the rest of the stuff was destroyed. There is also a symbolic representation pertaining to the transformation or metamorphosis of this beautiful insect from a caterpillar to a cocoon to a butterfly, the new creation. I think the first one, the root of all this, with the CIA and National Security Council firmly established, the first in a series of covert brainwashing programs was initiated by the Navy in the fall of 1947. It was called Project Chatter. It was developed in response to the Soviet success through the use of truth drugs. This rationale, however, was simply a cover story if the program were to be exposed. The research focused on the identification and testing of such drugs for use in interrogations and the recruitment of agents. And they say that program officially terminated in 1953. Maybe, maybe not. So when a person is undergoing trauma induced by electroshock, a feeling of lightheadedness is evident, as if one is floating or fluttering like a butterfly. There is also a symbolic representation pertaining to the transformation or metamorphosis of this beautiful insect from a caterpillar to a cocoon, to a butterfly, the new creation, which will return to its point of origin. Such is the migratory pattern that makes this species unique. Occult symbolism may give additional insight into the true meaning. Psyche, the word for both soul and butterfly, come from the belief that human souls become butterflies while searching for a new reincarnation. And a majority of the victims or survivors come from multi-generational satanic family bloodlines and are programmed to fill their destiny as the chosen ones or chosen generation. Some are adopted out to families of similar origin. Others used in this nightmare, and others are the dispendable ones, meaning the orphans and all those people they use. There also appears to be a pattern of family members affiliated with government or military intelligence. Many families come from Catholics, Mormons, charismatic Christians. So, and sometimes the victims may have multiple electrical prod scars on their skin or a resultant mole on their skin. A few may have had various parts of their bodies mutilated by knives, including branding irons or needles. Butterfly or occult tattoos are also common. Generally, the bloodline people are less likely to have subsequent markings, as their skin is to remain pure and unblemished. And they have different groups they put them through. Alpha is regarded as a general or regular programming, the base control. Beta is referred to as sexual programming. Delta is known as the killer programming. Theta, THETA, is considered the psychic programming. Omega is a self-destruct program known as code green. And then there is Gamma. Another form of system protection is through deception programming, which elicits misinformation and misdirection. This level is intertwined with demonology and tends to regenerate itself at a later time if inappropriately deactivated. Yeah, I don't think that most of these people are just random off the street that go through this intense process. That's why I'm thinking there's a dual operation going on. So this starts with the initial process begins with creating disassociation within the subject, usually occurring from the time of birth to about 6 years old. And it doesn't always have to be the primary parents. I'm running into a lot of cases where the parents were by all means pretty decent people, and it was the uncle or some grandparent that was hauling the kids off to these rituals and stuff, and unbeknownst to the parents in general. So it's kind of a mixed bag of things. So just because the parents are in the picture doesn't mean they really know what's going on. Or they could be actually the ones driving this stuff, but it could be another close relative. So that's what I'm saying to look out for. So this is primarily achieved through the use of electroshock or ECT, and at times performed even when the child is in the mother's womb. Due to the severe trauma induced through ECT, sexual abuse, and other methods, the mind splits off into alternate personalities from the core. Formerly referred to as multiple personality disorder, it is presently recognized as dissociative identity disorder and is the basis for Monarch programming. Further conditioning of the victim's mind is enhanced through hypnosis, double-bind coercion, pleasure-pain reversals, food, water, sleep, and sensory deprivation, along with various drugs which alter certain cerebral functions. The next stage is to embed and compress detailed commands or messages within the specified alter. This is achieved through the use of high-tech headsets in conjunction with computer-driven generators which emit inaudible sound waves. And some of this, some of this could be a little bit of an exaggeration too, right? Programming is updated periodically and reinforced through visual, auditory, and written mediums. Some of the first programming themes included The Wizard of Oz and Alice in Wonderland, both heavily saturated with occult symbolism. Many of the recent Disney movies and cartoons are used in a twofold manner, desensitizing the majority of the population, using subliminals and neuro-linguistic programming, and deliberately constructing specific triggers and keys for base programming of high impressionable monarch children. And I did that show not that long ago about how those cartoons are working on kids. Dr. Ewan E.W.E. Cameron, also known as Dr. White, was the former head of the Canadian, American, and World Psychiatric Association. Because of Cameron's extensive experience and credential, the CIA's Alan Dulles funneled millions of dollars throughout organizations like the Society for the Investigation of Human Ecology, which Cameron ruthlessly presided over. Experimentations were conducted at several locations in Montreal, mostly at McGill University, St. Mary's Hospital, and Allen Memorial Institute. Many of those exploited were abused children, which had been run through the Roman Catholic orphanage system. Not surprisingly, Dr. Cameron has been conveniently left out of most psychiatric journals. This may have been, in fact, due to Project MK Ultra being publicly exposed in 1970 through lawsuits filed by Canadian survivors and their families. The CIA and Canadian government settled out of court so as not to not to be required to officially admit to any wrongdoing. And there's another name that you'll run across, a former U.S. Army Lieutenant Colonel in the DIA's Psychological Warfare Division, Michael Aquino. Aquino, an eccentric genius they call him, founded the Temple of Set, an offshoot of the Church of Satan, and he will come up when I talk about the Presidio Army Base. I'll be talking about that soon. So, Aquino developed training tapes on how to create a monarch slave and worked as a liaison between government, military intelligence, and various criminal organizations. So, Yeah, he was really right in there. There's a whole list of them. I've got a whole list of them down below that this person listed for us. We got all these people are all involved. Duke University, University of Rochester, MIT, Georgetown, blah, 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 ARCO, China Lake Naval Weapons, the Presidio, Fort Detrick, Fort Campbell, Fort Lewis, Fort Hood, Redstone Arsenal, Offutt Air Force Base, Patrick Air Force Base, McClellan Air Force Base, McGill Air Force Base, Kirkland Air Force Base, Nellis Air Force Base, Homestead Air Force Base. Yeah, they're all in it. Other places as major programming sites are Langley Research Center, Los Alamos National Laboratories, Tavistock Institute, and areas in or by Mount Shasta, Las Vegas, Nevada. Yeah, that whole, I've talked about that when I did that China Lake show. That whole area out there they marked top secret. What do you think goes on out there? I mean, they've covered the ground, probably old history there and probably other stuff they're doing they don't want anybody to wander into, right? One of the first documented cases of the Monarch secret agent was that of a 1940s model named Candy Jones. The book, The Control of Candy Jones, from the Playboy Press, portrays her 12 years of intrigue and suspense as a spy for the CIA. Jones, whose birth name is Jessica Wilcox, apparently fit the psychological profile to be one of the initial experiments or human guinea pigs under the government scientific project MK Ultra. The most publicized case of Monarch has surfaced through the book Transformation of America, and that was written by Kathy O'Brien. Kathy O'Brien, she likely got abused, but there are a million, and I'm talking a million red flags around Kathy O'Brien. I would not count her as a reliable source. There's a whole group of them. There's a new woman who showed up in the last couple of years, and she's an MD, and she's claiming that she's from these elite families, and she goes on and on and on, and yeah, and she's written 2 books already. Both of her books, the covers look like they were designed for romance novels. So yeah, she's another one. So when you see the group of them, you'll get the idea because they all interview each other. They all get interviewed together, and it goes on and on. It's just a big cabal of them. So, yeah, I think Kathy O'Brien. I'm not going to start going after victims and stuff, but yeah, her partner Mark Phillips, that guy was questionable as can be. So I don't know. I would say, I would say, use your own eyes, okay? When former CIA Director William Colby was asked directly, what about Monarch? He replied angrily, we stopped that between the late 1960s and the early 1970s. Suffice to say that society, in its apparent state of cognizant dissidence, is generally in denial of the overwhelming evidence. So, yeah, it's all being denied, right? The monarch butterfly and its primary symbol for monarch mind control programming, where the name of Project Monarch itself comes from. Needless to say, if you ever see a monarch butterfly in an advert, music video, magazine cover, think mind control. And now that I've cued you in, you will actually see them all over the place. Some of them, they use a butterfly to cover up one eye, which is symbolic of that eye of Horus. Some place it over the mouth, which is silence programming. So, yeah, and they also use the Wizard of Oz is often used. One of the primary reasons that the Monarch mind control programming was named Monarch programming was because of the Monarch butterfly. The Monarch butterfly learns where it was born, its roots, and it passes this knowledge via genetics to its offspring from generation to generation. This was one of the key animals that tipped scientists off that knowledge can be passed genetically. The Monarch program is based upon Illuminati and Nazi goals to create a master race in part through genetics. If knowledge can be passed genetically, then it is important that parents can be found that can pass the correct knowledge onto those victims selected for the Monarch mind control. The primarily important factor for the trauma based mind control is the ability to disassociate. It was discovered that this ability is passed genetically from generation to generation. And I happen to say that my opinion is that this sounds like total BS to me. They always want to pump themselves up. Oh, we're so smart that we don't need to think about things. We'll just inherit genetically. My parents are going to pass down this knowledge, and I'm just like a little genius that I am. I'm just going to come to me through my DNA. Well, most of these people haven't been having their own children, so how that all works is probably a bunch of lies, right? Just how they build all this fear around. Oh, they're looking down in your house and they're doing this, and all these people. Oh, I'm getting hit by direct energy weapons. You know, it would take a person outside of your home to be hitting you with direct energy weapons. Now, do you really think they have the staffing or the ability to run around and hit everybody? No, they're doing it exactly like it's happening to me in my home. They're doing it the easy and the cheap way, and the way that nobody's looking at. They're doing it by pumping all this sulfur into my home, is how they're doing it. So, this makes them sound really great, right? Well, we pass this knowledge down to our offspring. Yeah, I don't believe one word of any of that, right? So, anyway, and this is the part that I find interesting because all of these people are so disassociated, right? They have that dark stare, and their parents drop them off at boarding schools and they're little infants, right? The butterfly never meets its mother. It must survive independently and remains a stranger to affection. An animal nurtured by mother's milk, however, is dependent on another for its basic survival. A child who grows up in a cold and detached home environment is similar to the butterfly in that kindness is sparing. Once an adult, it will be very difficult for that person to show compassion. Human affection is a very, very important element. At a young age, compassion is very crucial, not only for survival, but to establish these very important human values. Monarch butterflies symbolize transformation due to their life cycle, which involves several stages. The caterpillar, the butterfly starts out as a caterpillar, a small and ordinary creature. Chrysalis, the caterpillar folds itself into a chrysalis and starts to change. Butterfly, with great effort, the butterfly crawls out of its shell to flap its new wings and fly. This transformation represents rebirth and the ability to embrace change with grace and beauty. Additionally, the annual migration of monarch butterflies across vast distances faces numerous obstacles along the way, symbolizing the power of perseverance and the unwavering determination to reach one's destination. And of course, one of the earliest writings given reference to the use of occultism to manipulate the mind can be found in the Egyptian Book of the Dead. It is a compilation of rituals heavily studied by today's secret societies, which describes methods of torture and intimidation to create trauma, the use of potions, drugs, and the casting of spells, hypnotism, ultimately resulting in the total enslavement of the initiative. Other events ascribed to black magic, sorcery, and demon possession, where the victim is animated by an outside force, are also ancestors of monarch programming. It is, however, during the 20th century that mind control became a science in the modern sense of the term, where thousands of subjects have been systematically observed, documented, and experimented on. The term monarch butterfly and MK7, the monarch part is associated with the butterfly because of the transformation. And the name, like the monarchs, the name monarch for the butterfly is believed to be given in honor of Prince William of Orange, later King William III, as the butterfly's main color is that of the king's secondary title, Prince of Orange. And I have a picture of King Charles. He appears to be emerging from a heavy haze, a vivid vermilion mist that tinges everything save the king's serene face, his sympathetic hands which rest on his sword, and a small monarch butterfly about to land on a sovereign's shoulder. In a portrait of King Charles III, a monarch butterfly is depicted next to the king's shoulder. The butterfly symbolizes the king's passion for environmental causes and his evolution from prince to king. It is commonly believed that the monarch butterfly got its name from King William III, who was born in the Netherlands and known as the Prince of Orange until he ascended the throne in England. Monarchy is derived from the Greek word monarch. It is composed of two roots, mono, meaning alone, and acro, meaning rule. A monarch is a single individual who possesses supreme authority within a political entity, typically a state or country. Monarchs are usually hereditary rulers, meaning they inherit their position through lineage. The term monarch can be used to refer to both male and female rulers. The concept of monarchy emerged in ancient civilizations around the world. Early rulers were often seen as divine figures or representatives of the gods. In some cultures, such as ancient Egypt, monarchs were believed to be descendants from the gods themselves. Over time, the role of monarchs evolved and they became more secular rulers. In many European countries, monarchs were responsible for governing their territories, leading armies, and administering justice. During the Middle Ages, the power of monarchs was often absolute, and they ruled by divine right. In the modern era, the role of monarchs has diminished in many countries. Many states have adopted democratic or republican systems of government where the people elect their leaders. However, some monarchies still exist today, such as the UK, Spain, and Japan. In these countries, the monarch is usually a symbolic figurehead. So the root of the word monarch, that is where we get the word monarchy. And that comes monarch programming is a method of mind control used by numerous organizations for covert purposes. So that is the story. What is this all about? Well, it's all about splitting the sexes, right? Getting men and women to not like each other, not even like each other, let alone love each other. Divide and conquer. Now the trad wives is the newest joke. They want to compete with our creator, and look at them. They are a bundle of mess themselves. Most of them are loaded up on drugs themselves. They can barely speak English sentences. Yet they think they're going to be able to run things. Well, good luck on that. But they are having a lot of good luck destroying our children to get even with the rest of us. How long are we going to sit and act like destroying children and women and all this is going to be normal? It has been normalized to a lot of people. I don't see any of it normal. How long are we going to sit around and act like this is normal, where day after day more and more children are stolen and raped and abused, all in the name of religion? How long do we sit here and let that happen? I call sitting and letting it happen being a compliance. I call it being a asset to these people. Silence is also a form of compliance. Be safe.